Hey everyone, I'm Winter, and welcome to Winter Starcraft Bronze to Masters Episode 3, The Basics of Control and Hotkeys. In this episode, I'm going to be teaching you how to control your units, how to make them go where you want, do what you want in the most efficient manner, how to use your production, and remember to use it by using hotkeys, and how to use camera locations. And we're going to go through all of that in just a relatively small span of minutes here, probably 15 to 25. There will be, for each race, more specific, like, this is how you control Terran units, or specifically drops, or something like that, or how you larva inject with hotkeys as Zerg, or anything like that. But this is just the basics of control, just the ways to control your units right off the bat, and how to kind of synergize with the rest of your hotkeys and stuff. I can't believe I just said synergize out loud. But without further ado, we'll start off here. We'll just get some basic unit groups right off the bat. In a game of Starcraft, you're going to have two different things you're usually going to want to hotkey. Of course, they can be split into different subgroups, but those things are your production facilities, whether that be for upgrades, or for units, or for workers, and the units themselves. So let's look at the most basic setup here. At the very least, what you're going to want to have, well, let me throw a couple Marines on the field. We'll start with Terran. We'll just go with Terran. It's just a few Terran units right now. We'll throw a Marauder in, a Medevac, and a handful of SCVs here. And what can we do past this point? I'm going to start in and build myself a command center and a handful of barracks right now. Of course, we're in a unit tester, so these build instantly. But now that we see 3 barracks, and okay, you guys can see my hotkeys down in the bottom here. Remember, the way to use hotkeys by default, you can switch it up, but it's commonly accepted as a default, at least up to like the 5 or 6. You press Control, and whatever unit you have selected, or multitude of units or buildings you have selected, will be put in that control group. So right now I'm just going to press Control, and then I'm going to press 1, and now you see, let me deselect the Marine. I selected, a different Marine right now, but if I press 1 again, I have my Marine selected right off the bat. The Marine I put in the first control group here. And of course you can double tap that in order to center your camera on that Marine. So at any time you're across the map microing or something and you want to go control your Marine back at home, double tap right on back. And now, how do you add to a control group without making an entirely new one? Because not always are you going to have, say you have a unit here, you have an SCV here, and you have a Marine over here, and you can't just box them all from that range because they're all the way across the map. How do you add to a control group? Now we have our Marine on 1. The SCV, you don't want to put on another control group. You press Shift, and then you press the control group hotkey, and now it has been added into my first control group, giving me a Marine as well as an SCV on this control group. And that allows me to move both of the units with the same commands, whether it be a right click, which is a move command where the units will not attack until they get there, or an A click, which is an attack move. Actually right now we'll just go over the command card right now. We have move, which is just right click. Well, let's show how the AI works with enemy units here as well. I'm just going to go ahead and throw a few enemy Marines up on the map for us to contest. Alright. So, I'm going to show the differences between an A click, a right click, hold position, stop position, anything like that. There are some fancy tricks you can do with all of these, but the basics are, if you have a right click, your units will not automatically attack as they get in range. Their units, if not issued a command, will automatically attack, assuming they have weapons if they're not workers, while an A-moved unit will attack as soon as it gets into range. And this unit going to come in. The Marine going to try to contest him. Will be gunned down, but still got some damage done. And now we can do the same thing with a group of units. This group going to be on my first hotkey. I press Control 1 while they were all selected. I'm going to A and click. And even the workers will get the attack command. And they'll be targeted first. When there's no other extenuating circumstances, a unit will always attack. Like, if you put it on attack move, a unit will always attack the enemy unit that's closest to it that is also a threat to it. For example, if there are SCVs sitting here, like right now, I'm going to put the SCVs on a right click, and I'm going to put the Marauder on attack move. And you'll see the SCVs will only be targeted if the Marauder is not in range. So the right click here, as soon as the Marauder, well, if the SCVs get in range first, but as soon as the Marauder starts attacking, the Marine retargets it, and that's how the AI works in the game. Of course, if the workers are on attack move, they're considered attacking units, and they will be targeted first. That's why sometimes you can pull your workers in order to buffer your attacking units and get a little bit of extra damage done at the sacrifice of your workers. But that's about that for unit control. You also have hold position, which keeps your units in position. That's useful for, let's say, your Protoss. Let's go over the Protoss here. Throw a Zealot up. Maybe you want to make a wall as a Protoss player. Maybe you want to make sure those Zerglings don't get in. As Terran, you can just make some depots, which you can raise and lower. But as Protoss, you want to try to make sure those units can't get through. And one way to do that is having your units on hold position, which means no matter what happens, they will only attack units in range. So as these SCVs try to get through the wall of pylons here, they will not be able to because of the hold position. If these were Zerglings, they wouldn't be able to either. They're trying to get in, and as soon as they get in attack range, the Zealots will attack. With ranged units, it works as well because you can just have them hold position and they'll shoot from their one position. This is useful because when, say, a unit, like right now, I'll show you how a unit in range will take, once it comes under attack by another unit, the units, even if the other units aren't in range, sometimes they'll come to aid their friend if they're close enough. Like, I'm going to move this one Marine into attack range of the other Marines, and then their friends, like the medevac right now will heal. Let's try that again. I have to be a pretty close range, but as one unit moves into attack range, the other units say, oh wait, what's going on here? And go for it. So I'll put these guys. Another way to stop your units from moving is stop position. What stop position will do, it's not hold position. Stop position means that your unit will stop whatever it's doing right there and act like it has not been issued a command. So that means it'll attack units when they come into range, and it'll move towards them to attack, and attack the closest unit that is threatening to it. But it won't stay in its place. It will chase down enemy units for a short amount of time. Unlike a hold position, where the unit will stay there until issued a new command. Finally, there is patrol, which you can use to set up patrol pathing. I usually put my hotkey, an alternate hotkey, as Q. The default is P, so I'm going to click P right now. And you can set up a patrol pathing where your units will go back and forth and attack anything in range. They have the normal quote-unquote leash range. A leash range is the amount of distance that a unit will follow another enemy unit attacking automatically before it comes back to its patrol pathing, or before it comes back to where it was originally located. And that's usually about, well, we'll actually show right now. These units will come into range. This is just, I haven't issued any commands to the blue units, and they see they're under attack. The Marines will chase for a short while, but eventually, once the enemy gets out of the leash range, the units will come back. The leash range, every time the unit gets an attack off, the leash range is rechecked. So that way, if they keep being able to do damage to enemy units, they'll chase them possibly across the entire map. But if the enemy units are not taking consistent damage, eventually the leash range will kick in, and the units will go right back to where they were. I didn't issue a single command to these units during that. But that's the basics of control of army units in Starcraft. And now there are special cases when it comes to specialty units, such as Widow Mines or flying units have a little bit of a different zone of control, I guess you could say, a little bit different AI because they're not affected by terrain as much. But for the most part, that covers the basics there. Okay, let's go over hotkeying real quick. How can you hotkey your army and hotkey your production so that way you can make sure to be the most efficient? Alright, let's go back here. Actually, no, we gotta make some production. At the most basic level, I'll just run through really quickly all the races here and what you can use. What I like to use, of course, there are different options to this. A good way to kind of get an idea on how to use control groups, you can look at a pro replay, and from there you can see how they hotkey their control groups, how they hotkey their units, how they use their production, how they flip to it. Especially as Terran and Protoss, while Zerg has a little bit of a different strategy for it, but there's a lot of nuances of that as well. What I like to do with Terran, well, let me make some more Terran units here. Just make a little bit of everything right now. I'm gonna have to rebuild the buildings, but that's okay. Alright. Right now, in order to make all of these buildings on one command, I'm using shift. So that way, once the worker finishes a command, you can use this to make multiple supply depots in a row. Or maybe you want your worker to go back to mining after building a supply depot, you can shift-click it onto a mineral patch or something like that in order to do that. That's just what I'm doing right now to make sure I'm issuing these commands and I don't have to keep doing it the second it finishes, but instead I can do it all at once, and eventually they will all be completed unless the worker is interrupted. But what I like to do when it comes to hotkeying my army and hotkeying my production, I'll go over my production first. because this is something that's going to remain consistent. You only have a certain amount of production buildings in StarCraft. There's only a certain amount you can actually make when it comes to unit producing structures or upgrade or worker producing structures. As a general rule, as a random player, I like to maintain consistency. What does that mean? That means as a Terran player, as a Protoss player, as a Zerg player, I put all my command centers. Now that's a little bit inefficient. I put all my command centers, I put all my Nexi, I put all my hatches on 4. That's where I like to put them. I find if you look on the keyboard, you might think, oh, 1's the way to go. But your finger's it's a little bit tough to hit 1 all the time. 4 is just like right in the middle. I have kind of small hands. But of course, whatever suits you. Some players put it on 1, some players put it on 5. But here, of course, you can just keep making extra command centers here. I wonder if that'll take the full time to build. No, instantly. But as I get more, and since they fixed it, you can also build workers from planetaries without tabbing. Using tab will bring you through a different set of units. Like right now, let's say I have all the siege tanks and all my marines hotkeyed together. Now if I press tab, I can switch between the control of the siege tanks and the marines, and that's what I'm about to show you when I'm going through my production facilities here. Now I have all my orbitals together. But now, for my production as Terran, I put them all on one hotkey because my hands are small. I used to put them on 5. I used to put barracks on 5, factories on 6, and starports on 7. That's one way to do it. I choose to put all my production on 5. What does that mean? I pressed all my barracks hotkey, Control 5, and then Shift 5, and then Shift 5 again. And this adds even more buildings to my control group. So that means, how do I get through to another production here without actually clicking on it? Let's say like I'm attacking across the map. I'm working with my STV right now. I want to use my hotkeys to produce units. How am I going to do that? Well, I hit my 5 hotkey. I don't have to be looking at them. And I'm going to pump out some marines right here. Like you can see them in production. Usually they take longer. And this is producing marines back at home. And then I press tab. When I press tab, I now have the factory selected. You can see right there. You can see. It's pretty convenient. As Terran, a lot of your units are on A or D. Marines are on A, Marauders on D, Medevacs on D, Widowmines on D. So you can create a pretty solid unit composition by just pressing AD, tab, D, D. And then you pump out 2 Medevacs out of a reactor, for example. Usually you'd have a reactor, a few reactors, a few tech labs, get a little bit of everything out of those. You can get your upgrades. Usually, another thing I like to do that a lot of players do, put 2 engineering bays down and put them with your command centers just so you never forget them. Now, engineering bays aren't something you're going to be using every second of the game, which is why you usually don't tab to them, but what you can do just really quick, tab over, bam, you got your upgrades going. Even when you're across the map, you can do that. I'm just going to tab, just to get my 2-2 right there, and that's how I like to do upgrades as Terran. Now let's get to the army units. How do you actually control your army? Now you have the most basic way of doing it, which is just putting everything together, and then what I'm using right now is I'm selecting all of each type of unit, and then just shift 1. Now we have a 1, and we have A. I can press A and click, and my entire army goes towards this base. Now, this is very clunky. Why? I have ghosts, I have siege tanks, I have medevacs, I have Vikings, I have Widowmines. All of these units fire differently. All of these units take like a different path. Sometimes they're different speeds. Some of them are spellcasters and they want to be in like a different position to get their spells out. This is why you're going to want to, from pretty much the start of your StarCraft career, try to use as many hotkeys as you can for your army. I found 2 to 3 is usually sufficient for most army compositions. Now let's go through a few ideas for army compositions here. I like to think about what each type of unit does. Like what types of units work together and will always be near each other. First off, we have bio. Bio units, just in general. Marines, Marauders, and Medevacs. These are units, like, you're always going to have Medevacs with your bio. You always want them to be near them, unless you're going for a drop, which is a different story. But I like to hotkey these all on 1. That's the main bulky army. This goes for my Zealots. Well, I'll go through all the races here. But this is the main bulky army. They all have the same purpose. They all work together. So that means even though it's a little bit inefficient, like sometimes you might want to have your Medevacs healing while your units are moving, I find it's really clunky to try to move the Medevacs separately, especially if you have separate units to use. It's very difficult for many players to use over 3 hotkeys. I myself have a lot of trouble using over 3 hotkeys efficiently and simultaneously. So I really like to group my units in ways like this. Now, I use 1, 2, and 3. That's what we're going to be using here. But for 2, this is kind of situational. It depends on what I want to do. Like, sometimes maybe I want to go for a double drop, where I don't want these medevacs at the main army. So what I do, I just click them out. I hotkey them on 2, so that way now I have my main army on 1, and then I have my medevacs on 2. Because they're definitely something you don't want to be... You want to be able to get to these really quickly. Sometimes you can get away, like, if you're doing a drop that you don't really care about that much, or you can afford to throw away to just get them out of position, usually you can just use a shift click without hotkeying. But you always want to hotkey when you can. So that's one thing I use it for in the early game. When the game goes on a little bit, there's other units you usually want to use that hotkey for if you're only going to be using about 2 hotkeys. Usually, my general rule is, this is a little bit, like, there are special circumstances, like I learned how to put, my general rule is the bulky together main army units on 1, flying units on 2, and specialty units on 3. What does that mean? Flying units, as in Vikings here, or alternatively drops or something like that. Sometimes I put my siege tanks on 2. Usually I group my siege tanks with my army, because it's not too difficult to just stim and then control click your siege tanks and set up the siege up. Sometimes I put my Widow Mines on 2 if I don't have any other units, so that way I can make sure my Widow Mines burrow when I need them to. And for the most part, I like to put spellcasters on number 3. You do not want ghosts. Like right now, if you have ghosts hotkeyed in with your army, the ghosts will take priority. That means you can't stim as quickly. And when you do stim, your bio units will get stuck ahead of your ghosts, and your ghosts will be stuck in just a not ideal position. You want to have those manually controlled. This goes for ghosts. This goes for, usually I use ravens on 3 as well. It's very rare when I have ghosts and ravens, but when I do, usually I'm using 6, 7, and 8. For the more specialty units if I have to, or I just kind of click them with my mouse because they're not being used that often, because you only have so many units. But right now, let me show you what controlling all of these units at the same time, as well as my production looks like, including making SCVs right now. Want to make sure every one of these is together. So I've got my main bulky army. I've got the opposing army I want to crush. But if I want to engage appropriately as a Terran, this hotkey scheme really allows me to do so. So right now, let's just run through the hotkeys. I've got my main army on 1. On number 2, I got the Vikings. On 3, I have my spellcasters. On 4, I have my production facilities and also my orbital commands for scan purposes. And on 5, I have my production facilities. All of these are going to be used throughout a quote-unquote fight. Before you start a fight, you want to make sure you're not supply blocked. If you have to drop down supply depots, do so. Spend your money. Past that, queue up your production facilities, make a few more units, but then maybe the fight commences and you're going to have to engage. So you want to move all your units into position, into the correct position. You want the ghost to come in, well, sometimes from the side, sometimes ahead, after scanning. Oh, he might have High Templar or something like that. You can launch your spells and get out once you need to. While the Vikings, they do not want to be caught up in everything. Like if there are Colossi there, if there's something to shoot down, you don't want them stutter stepping with your bow, you don't want them splitting with your bow, you want them sitting there taking a good fight and also being maybe on the high ground or something out of range of the rest of the units. But at the same time, just going back, now just look at the bottom. I don't want you to look at what's going on the screen. I want you to look at this bottom area right here, the command box, if you will. I think it's called. But right now, as I move in, like what I like to do is pre-spread my bio a little bit, and then at this point, well, I'd research stim, and then it's about time to stim in. At the same time, launching EMPs. Behind that, just making a few more units as my units come in. But now I'm controlling the fight. I'm making sure has won the fight. But that entire time, be making sure you're making units, stuff like that. But this is the hotkey scheme. Bulky units on 1, flying units or drops or anything like that on 2, spellcasters and specialty units on 3, and then anything else past 5 for the rest of your army, while command centers and engineering bays on hotkey number 4, as well as production facilities just in general tab through on hotkey number 5, and I find that works very efficiently for Terran. Now, since we have a main scheme of things, I'm just going to run through Protoss and Zerg real quick. When it comes to controlling Protoss and Zerg units, like I said, the specifics of each race I'll get into a little bit later in the series. This is just to give a basic idea of each of the races. I'm combining this into one episode. I would recommend that you watch the entire episode so you kind of have a basic understanding of how other players are using their units as well. So if you're playing against a Protoss player, for example, you kind of understand what they're doing. But we're going to go back here, and now I'm going to work with the Protoss army. Alright, let me put together an army here. An army that has a multitude of hotkeys, if you will. Alright, and Protoss has a lot of spellcasters, a lot of power units, so it's something, there's a lot of finesse involved with Protoss a lot of the time. If you don't get all your spells off, then you're just being very inefficient. Since you don't have as many units, because units usually cost a lot more supply as Protoss, you're usually not going to be winning a fight as much as you would if you're controlling them all efficiently. Let's say we have a couple Nexi here. What does a base look like? We got some pylons. I'm gonna put up a couple warp gates here. And just a robo and a stargate with a robo bay and a fleet beacon. Oh, I need to research warp gate. Let's do that real quick. Quickest warp gate research time. Alright, warp gate is done. Warp gates are done. Alright, so let's go over the hotkey scheme here. I'm going to hotkey all my units and I'm going to show you what I did with it. Alright. Still got some Marines in there. I'm not entirely sure what they were doing. Now, I kind of follow the same scheme, but I have a few more general rules as Protoss. Just very general, like this is the hotkey that I'm using for this type of rules, more than anything else. But it follows the same trend. Like right here you see I have my ground army, my gateway units, and my bulky ground units. We're talking about Immortals, we're talking about Colossi here. I include my sentries, which are a spellcaster with it, because as for gateway units, there are no other spells to cast. If I tab through, like I'm tabbing through here, there's only one set of spells, unless you consider charge, which doesn't really need to be manually controlled, especially at the lower levels. But there are no more spells to cast this way. I have my sentries with my main army, which is usually where you want them to be, and I can very quickly, while moving my main army, cast Guardian Shield and get force fields out without sacrificing too much. Like, if they're on a move, they can still cast their spells, and that's what's important there, I find. I'm manually usually clicking through. Like, if I need to target, like, say I have 4 or 5 Immortals, I will click them in the fight. I'll just control-click and say, target this, Colossus or something. They do a lot of damage to Colossus, by the way. And then, as a general rule, my Mothership Core is always on 2. Always. You cannot forget the Mothership Core. It's very important to have the Mothership Core. It's the most supply-efficient and money-efficient unit in the game. It can make your Nexus into a planetary fortress. It can slow their entire army and set them up for some massive storms. Speaking of which, I should probably create... I'm just going to get Psystorm here. But, the same thing goes. I have my Warp Gates. My Warp Gate hotkey is actually W. That's the default, so to control my warp gates, which you can't actually do in a unit tester, I press W, and I can just warp in units very quickly, join them to the fight, press Shift 1, get my zealots into the fight. If you're really fancy, you can make your proxy pylon a hotkey. That's something I haven't been doing, but I really should have doing, so if you're starting out, should be doing. So if you're starting out, that's a smart idea to have. Just put it on 7 or something like that, somewhere where you'll be able to jump to it, if you really need to. But at the same time, my production, my robo, my Stargate, everything that, when it makes a unit, it has to walk across the map is on 5, and I just tab through it. Let's say I need a Void Ray and a Colossus. Well, there we go. Usually I include my Void Rays with the army because they're a bulky ranged unit, and they don't fly as fast as, say, a Viking or something like that. So usually I include it with the main ground army for Protoss. For specialty units here, on hotkey number 3, I have my Templar. Past this, whether it be observers here, or maybe oracles or something like that, maybe you opened oracles or have a few Phoenix out. Usually I'll choose something to put on 6, and I'll just include my forges if I have them with my Nexi. I'll include these on 6, just so there's something like you're not touching every second, unless you're really good. But when you need it, maybe you know, instead of having to come across the map for the observer, say you hotkey the observer on 6, you see, oh, there's his army. And you don't want the observer to get picked off, so you move it a little bit out of the way. You want to follow his army, so you shift-click it on his medevac or something like that, because that'll always be with his main army. That's what I like to do with Protoss, just in general. Honestly, for the most part, you can get away with having a ground army, a Mothership Core, and a specialty units tab. Well, everything else is manually controlled, but if you want to optimally control your units, you want to split them up into as many hotkeys as possible that you can efficiently control. And I recommend at least starting with 3 hotkeys for your army and 2 for your production, splitting off the Nexus and the production facilities. Past that, it takes a lot of practice. Alright, finally, Zerg. We're going to clear the map here for the Zerg army. But to start out, I'm just going to make some Zergling Baneling. And then I'm going to make some Infestors, as well as Mutalisks. and Vipers. Now, there are lots of there's a difference, really, between Zerg. Well, Zerg is my main race as well, so I feel a lot more comfortable using more hotkeys with Zerg. And also, a lot of their units just kind of can be together. They fight as a swarm. So it really comes down to how you set up the fight more than how the fight is controlled. Zerg, if you have to control the fight perfectly, you're probably in a tough situation. But the way I like to hotkey, we're just going to put the hatches here on 4, just control 4 for both of them. My mutas, I almost always have on number 3. I always started putting my mutas on 3, so I haven't been able to adapt them to putting flying units on 2. But then I put my specialty units like Infestors on 2, and then the Vipers on 5, because I use camera location hotkeys for my queens. Like right now, I'll just show you real quick. I'll have an entire episode on camera locations. But this is camera locations. Like right now I put F2 and F3 so I can just jump to, and I just use that to inject here once I have the energy. Just select my queens and inject. But right now, the same ideas apply. Having my ground army, the ground army that's going to be together and all go in together for the most part on 1. Of course, if you have counterattacks to split off or anything like that, what I like to do is I come in, I just get the Zerglings around, and then I click the Banelings where I want them, so that make sure they don't go off on, like, say, the 2 Marauders in the front, but instead the 15 Marines in the back. The mutas themselves I have on 3, which is very easy to hit hotkey for me, so I'm always on top of them. Mutas are a unit that the more you use them, the more you're going to get out of them. They can take damage and they can regenerate. That should already kind of explain the usefulness of them. And the Vipers, they're something you want to have hotkeyed, because landing a few Blinding Clouds or a few Abducts can change a battle hugely. Like right now, say, for some reason, ZVZ, you have Vipers. But imagine these Infestors were Colossi. That's the difference. If I don't land, if these Vipers are not in position, if I pull the Colossi at the start of the fight, as opposed to if my Vipers are out of position and they just get feedbacked or something, it's a huge game changer. You want to land those spells. That's why I have everything separately here, as well as the hatches, just on an easy to hit hotkey. With Zerg, there's no other production facilities besides your hatches, unless you count your queens. But usually, I'll have queens with the main army as well, so those would be grouped in with the ground army, assuming I have good creep spread. But that's the normal hotkey scheme for Zerg. And usually you won't be adding Vipers until later, so you can manage with 3 hotkeys. Before I get Spellcasters out, I like to hotkey either my Queens or my Banelings on a separate hotkey, but because at that point they're a lot more impactful to the game, as opposed to when I need to control specialty units like, say, Infestors. So just make sure I can hit those easily. And also, if I put my Infestors on my main hotkey, they go in with my ground army instead of staying behind, pulling back when my Banelings move in. But that's the normal... my distribution of hotkey schemes. Of course, there's a lot more to it. When we get into each individual race, I'll be going a lot more in-depth into exactly what hotkeys are used for, exactly how to control fights in certain situations. But this is just a basic scheme you can start to use in your games right now. Just main army on 1, or whatever hotkey you choose to have your main army on. 2 is for more specialty units, whether it be flying or spellcasters, whatever you choose. Or maybe units you just want to have in a different position every fight. 3, also another specialty hotkey for splitting off units, maybe into a different group or something like that. 4, for command centers, for main bases, hatches, nexi. Also to use scans, chrono boost, and upgrade from hatches. 5, if you're Terran or Protoss, for production facilities, and Zerg, I use it for another army hotkey. In that, I mean, if you have any questions, make sure to leave them in the comments below. Or also hit me up on my stream, twitch.tv/ZeoFreebird. But I hope this was helpful. Just a basic primer on hotkeys. I know a lot of you probably already know how to use hotkeys, but I hope you learned at least, maybe picked up a couple ideas to try in your games. And make sure to like, subscribe, and look forward to the next episode. And make sure to comment on what I should add. I'll be happy to add maybe 1 to 2 minute appendixes or something like that to an episode retroactively in order to make it more filled out. This was just something... I didn't really think it out, I just kind of went with it, so it's a little bit of a different style. I didn't cut to my face at all, because I haven't taken a shower yet today, but that's, oh my god, Vipers look really cool when they're in a circle like that. But I hope you enjoyed, make sure to like and subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Thanks for watching, I've been Winter, and I'll see you next time.